What is going on, everyone? It is Connor, your host with the most, back with another episode of Clutch Crew Sports. We are down to the final 4 episodes of Clutch Crew Sports. On this episode, we're going to be looking at the recap from the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, looking at the 4 teams who got eliminated and what they need to do going forward into the upcoming offseason, as well as previewing the 2 conference championship games, the AFC and NFC championship games, the final 4 teams in the playoffs. Like I said, we are down to the final 4 episodes of Clutch Crew Sports. There's going to be this episode, then there'll be an episode next week, which will be covering the 2 teams who don't make the Super Bowl, as well as some other topic. I haven't really decided what that's going to be yet. Then the following week will be the Super Bowl episode. If everything goes right, I should have Eric with me on that episode. So that way you'll get to have Eric in another episode one more time. And then after the Super Bowl, there'll be one final episode recapping the Super Bowl and just the final episode overall. But let's go ahead and get into this episode. Going ahead and going to be starting to look at the teams who lost in the divisional round. Divisional round playoffs, they weren't as exciting, unfortunately, as the wild card round was. You kind of had 2 good games and 2 blowouts. Whereas the wild card round, really, aside from the Cowboys-Bucks game and like the second half of the Seattle-San Francisco game, pretty well all the games on wild card weekend were actually pretty exciting. Whereas, like I said, in this instance, there was the Chiefs and Jags was exciting, and the Niners and Cowboys game was pretty good. But of course, the Eagles-Giants game and the Bengals-Bills game were pretty much blowouts, so they weren't too exciting. But going ahead and looking at the teams that were eliminated in the 2 Saturday games, starting, of course, with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They did end up losing to the Chiefs 27-20. Patrick Mahomes, of course, got hurt during that game. He had a high ankle sprain. Chad Henne did come in and lead a 98-yard touchdown drive for the Chiefs before halftime, before Mahomes played the entire second half. But overall, it was a good performance for the Jacksonville Jaguars. A lot of people didn't even think they were going to be here, halfway through the season. A lot of people had already written them off, Zach included. I know Eric still had some belief in them, but Zach had pretty much written the season off when the Jags had gotten to that point where they were like 2-5 or 2-6, and didn't think they had a chance. So a really good look for the Jags that, they really started to figure things out this year. It was definitely very evident that Urban Meyer was the problem last year. He came in and was just probably the worst head coach we've seen in the NFL in quite some time. And the Jags, they really did a smart job, of course, in the offseason as well, of hiring Doug Peterson. I know there was a lot of talk during when they were looking for a coach that they were going to hire Byron Leftwich on, but they definitely did make the right choice in hiring Doug Peterson. He's a Super Bowl winning head coach. He's a former quarterback himself. You've got a young quarterback that you're trying to develop. He's an offensive guru. He, turned Carson Wentz into an MVP, led, a Nick Foles-led team to the Super Bowl. So, definitely was the right move for them, in my opinion, hiring him. And it really showed, Trevor improved a lot this year. He's still got that connection with Travis Etienne. They're still a dynamic duo. Christian Kirk really did a good job this year, trying to live up to that big contract he caught. Zay Jones had a breakout year. Evan Ingram had a good year. So overall, a lot of improvements for the Jaguars toward the end of the season. And, it's definitely not a far cry to think that this team is going to be the team that's going to be at the top of the AFC South next year. The Texans are still the Texans. The Colts have a lot of issues they have to deal with. And, of course, the Titans, they had an epic collapse at the end of the year. So it's definitely not, far cry to think that, going into next season, the Jaguars are going to be the favorites to win the AFC South again. Who knows, though? The Jaguars, they tend to do this thing where Zach and Eric know it very well, where they'll have a really good year and then, you think everything's on the rise, and then, the following season comes around and they just end up with like a top 5 draft pick again. So, I don't think that's going to happen. I think this team is definitely, in a better spot than that 2017 team was that ended up, really tanking the following year after going to the AFC Championship game. They have a much better quarterback situation, a improving defense and improving offense, a much better head coach also, when you compare Doug Peterson to Doug Marrone. So, definitely some things that, are looking up for the Jags, and I definitely can see them for sure making the playoffs next year. Definitely probably need to get a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball and probably just get some more pass catchers. It's one of those things that obviously Kirk had a really good year, but Marvin Jones, of course, is really getting up there in age. And, Zay Jones, while he did have a good year, it wasn't a great year by any stretch. So definitely probably want to go out and get some more wide receivers if possible and, probably shore up that offensive line a little bit too, because the Chiefs pass rush did a really good job getting to Trevor in the second half. So get some more pieces on that O-line for next year. Then moving on from the Jaguars, we move on to the New York Football Giants, who took a 38-7 beating in prime time from the Philadelphia Eagles. Another surprise team this year, the New York Giants. A lot of people, I thought that they were going to be the cellar dweller in the NFC East. They still had Daniel Jones. There was a lot of uncertainty surrounding Saquon Barkley and if he was going to be okay, if he was going to come back and still be good. Was he going to get hurt again? Obviously, the Giants didn't do anything really to address their pass-catching woes during the offseason. When they still just were rolling with Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard and, and Kenny Golladay, the, $1 million man who never plays. But definitely was a really good season for the Giants. A shock season, of course. No one thought they were going to make the playoffs, but Saquon Barkley really came back strong. He looked like his old, 2018, 2019 self. He's a leading candidate for Comeback Player of the Year. The biggest thing that really concerns me for the New York Giants going forward is really just, they've decided that they're committed to Daniel Jones and that he's going to be their quarterback again next year, but I'm not so sure that's really the right decision, because if you go back and look at this offense was really, really driven by the run game. Like Saquon Barkley, of course, like I said, he looked like he was his old 2018, 2019 self. He was really driving this offense, really the, key piece on this offense that was making it work. And, it's just one of those things that, Daniel Jones played well, but again, he didn't play great by any stretch of the imagination this year. There was still definitely times when, he looked like the old Daniel Jones. And, the Giants, of course, they made the playoffs, but they were still only 9-7-1. So it's not like they had a, 12 or 13 win season. So, I'm not so sure. It definitely is hard for them, of course, because, now that they don't have a top pick in the draft, they wouldn't be able to go out and draft like a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud or someone like that. So, but the thing for the Giants, though, is that the quarterback class in this draft is really deep. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility to think that they could get, a quarterback at pick number 25. Maybe get one of those late round picks. I mean, Lamar Jackson was a late round, first round pick. So there's definitely possibilities there for them, but I just don't see them being able to have any long-term success if they stick with Daniel Jones at quarterback. I'm still not a believer in him. I definitely could see, like, as long as Saquon Barkley stays healthy, they could, be in this spot again where they, get a wild card spot, maybe win a playoff game. But I just don't see any way that they could turn into an NFC championship contender or anywhere close to a Super Bowl contender with sticking with Daniel Jones at quarterback. I mean, and that's the other thing with Daniel Jones is that, most of his contributions on the offense, like big contributions, were running the football too. He's a very mobile quarterback. So it was just like, it was like a, poor man's version of the Ravens offense for the past few years, where you just have a really heavy rushing offense. And it just worries me again, if Saquon Barkley goes down again with another injury, because, he stayed healthy this year, but he has a history of them. So if he were to go down with another injury, it just makes me think that this offense would go back into the bottom ranks of the league again without him out there. So definitely looking at things to go forward for this team. Definitely got to get some more wide receivers. I mean, you're not going to be able to do well with, just having guys like Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard as your number one and number two receivers. Like, Slayton's good, don't get me wrong, but I mean, he's definitely not in the upper echelon of receivers in the league to be a number one receiver. So, obviously get some more pieces on defense as well. Kayvon Thibodeau had a really good rookie year, so, they look to be looking pretty good at the edge rusher position, but, help shore up that secondary, get some more pass catchers, and, in my opinion, get a quarterback, because I don't think Daniel Jones is the answer still, even after this season. So they definitely have especially with the way that they exited the playoffs, just getting blown out. I know the Eagles are good and everything, but when you get to the divisional round of the playoffs, you definitely don't expect to lose 38-7. So definitely some work to be done there for the Giants. Moving on to the two teams that lost on Sunday, starting with the Buffalo Bills, losing at home 27-10 to the Bengals, the only home team to lose their game this past weekend. And definitely just not a good showing whatsoever for the Buffalo Bills. They got beat in pretty much every aspect of the game, and it all started up front with the offensive and defensive lines. The Bengals offensive line was pushing around the Bills defensive line, and the Bengals defensive line was pushing around the Bills offensive line. So when you're getting beat in the trenches, there's no way that you're going to be able to win the game. Josh Allen had very little time to throw the ball most of the time. The Bills couldn't get any sort of a run game going all game. And Joe Burrow just had way too much time to pass the ball and way too long to make decisions. The Bills' pass rush was not getting home at all. Definitely shows that they were missing Von Miller a lot on that defense. They were able to kind of make it through for the past few weeks without him, but definitely showed that they were missing him. Gregory Rousseau and Boogie Basham and A.J. Epinesa were not enough to get any consistent pressure, especially given that they were going against a banged-up offensive line. This Bengals offensive line was playing with 3 starters that were out, and the starting center, Ted Karras, was also playing with a bit of an injury. So the fact that they weren't able to get any pressure whatsoever on Joe Burrow is very concerning for the future. Like I said, and it's just one of those things that, when you can't get any pressure on the quarterback, your secondary is not going to be able to hold up for much longer either. So, just not a good showing overall there. The Bengals looking very strong, and on offense, like I said, Allen didn't really have any time at all, but it really does also open the question back up about their wide receiver problem going on, because obviously Stephon Diggs is, he's one of the best receivers in the NFL. There's no question about that. But, Gabriel Davis, who's supposed to be their number 2 receiver, was very inconsistent all year. Like, he had games where he looked really good, and then he'd have games where he would just kind of disappear. And, it's one of those things that you definitely need a good wide receiver too, because if they don't have someone that can consistently perform as a wide receiver too, then the other team's just going to double team Stephon Diggs all the time, and then you're not going to be able to do anything in the passing game, especially with the lack of the run game that the Bills have. So, I think the offensive line is fine. Like, I don't think any major changes need to be made, just because they performed really well for the majority of the season. So, obviously they performed really badly in this game, but they performed well throughout the season. So I don't think any real changes need to be made on the O-line, but definitely need to make an effort to, get some more wide receivers, really try and figure out this running back problem, because, I know they drafted James Cook and they were expecting him to, be the guy, but, he didn't really get too much playing time. Devin Singletary has pretty much proven that he's not going to be the guy for them going forward. So, really figure out this problem when it comes to running the ball. There was a lot of people who thought that they were going to be a prime candidate to land Christian McCaffrey. And honestly, if they had landed Christian McCaffrey, then I think the outcome of this game would have been a lot different, because, when you go in, Josh Allen's a great quarterback and everything, but when you become one-dimensional, it becomes really hard to make a deep playoff run. Like, you can do well in the regular season, but when it comes to the playoffs, you have to be more than just a one-dimensional team. So, more pass catchers, figure out the running back situation, and also just, work a little bit more to help shore up that front seven for the Bills. Their run defense, of course, also didn't really perform really well in that game, and their run defense has always been the weakness of this team. So, do more to help that front seven and, help get more pressure on the quarterback, which will help with Von Miller coming back from his injury next year. But, never hurts to have, another edge rusher on the team and, get some more players to help stop the run. Then moving on to the final team that got eliminated this past weekend, and that is, of course, they find themselves in this spot again, missing the NFC Championship game. That is the Dallas Cowboys losing to the Niners 19-12. And, really, I got to say for the Cowboys is, big props to their defense in that game, because their defense really helped bail them out of that game being a blowout, because Dak Prescott did not look good for the majority of the game. He had 2 really bad interceptions that he threw, especially after Tony Pollard went out. They had no run game whatsoever. Ezekiel Elliott, it's basically been proven at this point that like Tony Pollard's got to be the running back going forward for the Cowboys. Like Zeke is no longer the RB1 for this team. He's past his prime. He's just not as dynamic as Pollard is. Pollard, he's got such a great burst. He's really shifty. He's a great receiver. Whereas at this point, Zeke is pretty much turned into a blocker and a short yardage running back. He's probably not going to like being relegated to that RB2 role, but if I'm the Cowboys, I'm going all in on Tony Pollard. I'm trying to trade Ezekiel Elliott if I can because, his contract, of course, is still eating up a lot of their cap space. So if I'm the Cowboys, I'm finding any way I can to try and trade Ezekiel Elliott and just put all my chips in on Tony Pollard. And really, there's just a lot of questions for Dak Prescott because, he led the league in interceptions this year. Of course, he had 2 really bad ones in this game, and it's really a question that's starting to open up for the Cowboys. They had this problem with Tony Romo in the past. Like, is Dak Prescott going to be able to lead them to an NFC championship game or even, potentially lead them to a Super Bowl? Is he going to be that quarterback? And I don't think so. I think he's kind of falling into that same category as Tony Romo, where he's a really good quarterback, but when the game's on the line in the clutch moments, or if you need someone to step up and be the guy that's going to lead you to the promised land, he's not going to be that guy. And that was the problem that the Cowboys had for a long time with Romo, and it's really starting to show through with Prescott as well. And like I said, major props to their defense because if there's one thing on this team that definitely doesn't need to be fixed, it's the defense. Micah Parsons is one of the best young defensive players, he's one of the best defensive players, period, in the game right now. Trayvon Diggs definitely improved a lot this year. He didn't, of course, have the interception numbers that he had last year, but he did better in coverage, which, is the more important thing. He had 11 picks last year, but also gave up 1,000 yards in coverage. So he definitely improved this year. DeMarcus Lawrence definitely showed signs of being, back to his old form this year. So major props to the Cowboys defense. I would definitely, I'm not sure if there's any real expiring contracts on that defense right now, but if there are any, I would definitely be working to, re-sign a lot of those guys and get them locked in because that defense is one of the best in the league right now. But there's a lot of questions on this offense. Also, especially when it comes to pass catching as well, like who's going to be that second guy after CeeDee Lamb. They traded Amari Cooper to the Browns. Jerry Jones is a big fan of Michael Gallup, but I'm not really sure he's the guy to be a number 2 receiver. And, just figure stuff out on the offense to get the ball to people other than CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard. And like I said, do whatever you can to trade Ezekiel Elliott. I'm not so sure what they're going to do about the quarterback position. Like I said, I don't think Dak Prescott's the guy that's going to be able to lead them, but, there's obviously no real better alternative right now. Like, I'm not saying, go out and dump Dak Prescott because then they're just going to be left without a quarterback and there's not really a good replacement. So I guess it's just all about finding the right time. Who knows? Maybe Prescott can turn it around, but, I'm just not a believer in it. So that's the 4 teams that got eliminated and are going to be heading into next season with a lot of questions. Now we're going to move on to the 2 conference championship games. And first off here at 3 o'clock on Sunday, we have the NFC championship game between the number 2 seed San Francisco 49ers and the number 1 seed Philadelphia Eagles. The Niners, of course, still riding that win streak. They're on a 12-game win streak now. They looked, not super good against the Cowboys, but, they did just enough to get the win. The Cowboys, of course, had a really good defense. The Niners defense played really well. They didn't get a whole lot of pressure per se, but their secondary held up really well. The linebackers were doing good against the run. And, Purdy still looks good. He still looks poised. He still looks calm. He was making throws when he needed to make them. George Kittle's one of the best tight ends in the league right now. They just have a lot of weapons on this offense. It's like, how are you going to stop everything? If you take away George Kittle, now Christian McCaffrey's doing stuff. If you take away Christian McCaffrey, now Deebo Samuel's doing stuff. So there's just a lot of weapons on this offense. And, like I said, they didn't look the greatest last week, but, like I said, they were going up against a top-notch defense. They're going against another top-notch defense here with the Eagles, but, there's just way too many weapons on this offense to be able to keep it down for long. Their offensive line is still, of course, one of the best in the league. And, I think for them, they're really getting a good answer about their quarterback going future. Like, Brock Purdy seems like he's going to be the guy. They obviously have Trey Lance, who's still going to be on the roster, but Purdy's really stepped into this role, and I think he's earned himself the starting job for next year. And then, of course, the team on the other side, the Philadelphia Eagles, they looked like the Eagles of pretty much the whole season against the Giants. They were dominant on the ground, close to 300 yards rushing in that game. Jalen Hurts only had like 150 yards passing because, he didn't need to throw the ball because they were running the ball all over the Giants. Obviously, this is going to be a much better defense that they're facing here with the Niners. The front seven of the Niners is borderline the best front seven in the league. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens in this game. If the Niners are able to contain Miles Sanders and if they're able to contain the running game, with Hurts running as well, how's Hurts going to perform if the game has to be put on his back? It's definitely interesting when it comes to like quarterbacks like this that like to rely on the run. We've seen it in the past with Lamar Jackson. It's one of those things that if you take the run game away from the Ravens and force Lamar Jackson to beat you with his arm, chances are that's probably not going to happen because Lamar Jackson's not the greatest passer in the world. Jalen Hurts, he's obviously a decent passer. He's not bad by any stretch, but he's not, he's not Joe Burrow. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Josh Allen. He's not one of these guys that if you have to put the game on his shoulders throwing the football, I definitely wouldn't trust him as much as I would trust some of the other guys in the league. That being said, he's still very capable, and the Eagles were the number one seed for the reason. They have a lot of good weapons on this team. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are one of the best wide receiver tandems in the league. Their defense is, of course, really good. They were all over the Giants in that game. Hassan Reddick, he's like him. It's going to be a good, really fun to watch, him versus Nick Bosa, which one of them does a better job of getting to the quarterback, getting pressure on the QB. Because, I know Reddick wasn't named as a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year like Nick Bosa was, but Reddick definitely deserved to be in the conversation for that. So it's going to be an exciting matchup. It's, of course, going to be in Philly as well. Hostile atmosphere, Lincoln Financial Field. The Philly fans, of course, are always going to be rowdy and riled up. That being said, however, I am, if we're looking at my picks last week for the second week in a row, I was 3 of 4 on my picks last week. So overall, that puts me at 8 of 10 on my picks. Of course, the Bills were the only ones that got me last week, but I'm going to go ahead in this game and pick the San Francisco 49ers. Like I said, they're still the hottest team in the league right now. I just think this is the Eagles, they really haven't had too much of a challenge per se since Jalen Hurts has come back from his injury. This is going to be a whole different animal playing against the San Francisco 49ers. The Giants, that's one thing, but now you're going against a real team, a real Super Bowl contender in my mind, and the team that's pretty much been the best team in the NFC for this, during the second half of the season. The Eagles were the best team in the NFC in the first half, but in the second half of the season, I would argue the Niners were the best team in the NFC. So I know it's going to be tough. I know it's going to be on the road, and it's going to be a really close game. Both of these games I think are going to be really close, but I'm going to have to go ahead and give it to the San Francisco 49ers, and Brock Purdy going to be a rookie quarterback starting in the Super Bowl. That's just my opinion on that. We'll see how it goes, but definitely a game that could go either way, but I'm picking the Niners. Moving on to the AFC Championship game, we have a rematch of last year's AFC Championship game, the Bengals at the Chiefs. Once again, same scenario with the Bengals going to Arrowhead to play against the Chiefs. Obviously, the Bengals won last year in overtime to get to the Super Bowl, and both of these teams are still pretty much unchanged from the way they were last year. The Chiefs obviously don't have Tyreek Hill, but they're still the Kansas City Chiefs. They were still the 1 seed in the AFC. The Bengals are still the Bengals. The O-line's a little bit banged up, but, they still have Burrow. They still have Chase. They still have Hendrickson and Hubbard on defense. And, it's basically, like I said, it's just a rematch of last year. Basically the same teams. Now, one thing that is interesting to note here, of course, is the fact that, of course, Patrick Mahomes has his injury. He's got a high ankle sprain from that game against the Jaguars. And according to him, he is good to go. Not that I expected anything less. He did play the second half of that game against the Jaguars, but, he says he's ready to go. He says he's fine. I said I had no doubt that he was going to play this game anyway, but it'll definitely be interesting to watch and see how healthy he really is. His mobility really was suffering in that game against Jacksonville after he hurt his ankle. So, how much of that is going to be a factor, because he's really good at, creating time and getting out of the pocket and, making creative plays using his mobility. So That being said, even if his mobility is cut down, his decision making, his arm strength, his, just being a quarterback, he's still, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, even without his mobility. His mobility is really what makes him the best quarterback in the league on top of everything else. But even without his mobility, he's still a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. So no concerns there really in my mind for Mahomes outside of his mobility. Obviously they still got Travis Kelce. He's trying to become the second, move into second place on the all-time playoff receiving list, which he can do. I think he needs like 80 yards to pass second place, which is Julian Edelman, but I think he can do it for sure in this game. The Bengals, of course, on the other side, like I said, they're still the same team from last year. And the other thing that's interesting with this game too is, the Bengals, they've won the last 3 meetings against the Kansas City Chiefs. They met them at the end of the regular season last year. They met them in the AFC Championship game last year, and they met them in the regular season this year. And the Bengals came out on top all 3 times. So, the Chiefs, of course, are the higher seed, and it's going to be at Arrowhead. But the Bengals have the Chiefs' number, kind of like how the Chiefs have the Bills' number when it comes to the playoffs. The Bengals have the Chiefs' number. So, definitely going to be an interesting matchup here for sure to see what goes on. Burrow, he's, of course, also a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. So, really, I mean, in some ways, you could argue that these are the 2 best quarterbacks in the league. I know some people will, want to insert like Josh Allen or, Jalen Hurts or, someone like, or, even Brady in some of these conversations. But in my opinion, these are probably the 2 best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, going face to face, head to head. And it's going to be interesting to see, obviously the Bengals with that offensive line, they did a good job against the Bills, but, this is the Chiefs that we're talking about here. This is Patrick Mahomes. This is Andy Reid. Is their offensive line going to be able to hold up against the Chiefs this time? Because the Chiefs, it's, they're different when it comes to passing. Chris Jones is an absolute monster on the inside. Are they going to be able to contain him? Are they going to be able to contain Clark off the edge? And same thing for the Chiefs. Is their O-line going to be able to hold up against Hendrickson and Hubbard? It's going to be a really close game. But at the end of the day, in this close game, I know the Bengals have the number on the Chiefs, and I know they, had a great performance and Mahomes is hurt. But I'm still going to go ahead and take the Kansas City Chiefs at home at Arrowhead. They really want to get over this hump of being able to get past the Bengals, and they really want to get back to the Super Bowl again. Mahomes is more determined than ever, keeping up that thing of proving that he can win without Tyreek Hill. And just when it comes to the coaching as well, I still have to give the coaching for the Kansas City Chiefs the edge. The way they were able to adjust after Mahomes got hurt in that game against the Jaguars, I think really speaks to the coaching level of Andy Reid and the coaching level of just this whole coaching staff. I mean, Zach Taylor's a really good coach too, don't get me wrong, but Andy Reid in my mind's on another level. And, of course, if Mahomes looks more hurt than he's leading on to be, and especially if Henny has to come in, then, I could see the Bengals taking this easily. But, Mahomes says he's ready, and I believe that he's ready, so I'm going to go ahead and take the Chiefs, which would lead to a rematch from the Super Bowl a few years ago, between a rematch of Super Bowl 54 between the Niners and the Chiefs. That is my prediction. Hopefully, for my sake, it happens that way, especially at least for my sake. Hopefully the Chiefs win, because I don't want the Bengals doing good again. But that is going to be it for this episode, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you leave down in your comments below who you think is going to advance to the Super Bowl, who you think is going to be facing off in Super Bowl 57. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss these last few episodes of Clutch Crew Sports. And I will see you guys back here next week for the recap of these games, and I'll see you guys next time.